before the crisis. So I finished off with what I thought was a nice rhetorical flourish at the end of my paper. And I didn't think it was going to become reality. But when I first showed this to one of my good friends in the econometric profession, when I was doing at the time finishing my master's degree, Eric Soe, he saw this particular phenomenon, and his comment was, Steve, if you've identified anything that exists in capitalism, that really exists, we're in deep, deep trouble. That was in 1992. Well, he's right. What you can see going on there is what looks like a period of stability leading up to the chaos at the other end. And that's what actually happened. Moderation preceded the crisis. And this was, again, a set of phenomena that turned up from a model that I did not expect these results to come out of. I was simply trying to generate a model that could have a debt deflation. The fact that it gave me rising inequality and moderation before the crisis was an emergent phenomena of the model. Now, was that a particularly deep insight? Well, I thought it was at the time, but I've realised since that I can drive this model by simply taking three macroeconomic definitions and putting them in dynamic form. So if I define the employment rate, how many people have a job divided by the population, the wages share of GDP, what wages are divided by GDP, and the debt to GDP ratio, and the definitions are obvious. If I define those and then put them in dynamic form by differentiating them with respect to time, I get three statements that are categorically true. This is not a model. This is a statement of fact, but put in dynamic terms rather than as static definitions. The employment rate in percentage terms will rise if economic growth exceeds the sum of growth in labour productivity and population growth. That's a fact. The wages share of output will rise if wage demands exceed the growth in labour productivity. The second fact. And the third one, which is pretty obvious, the private debt ratio will rise if debt grows faster than GDP. Now, you put those three facts together and put them into a model. The way you put them into a model is to take some sort of relationship between those various entities. So I've taken an incredibly simple set of relationships. I have investment motivated by the rate of profit, which I think is a reasonable assumption. Wage demands are motivated by the level of employment. Debt incurred when desired investment exceeds retained earnings. So I don't have any Ponzi investing going on here. This is entirely productive investment. Put those three assumptions together and I get a model where you get workers end up paying for the increase in the debt level. They're not doing any borrowing the model at all, but they're the ones who pay for it through a declining wages share of GDP. And that was quite a remarkable outcome. So I might have to ask the person in the background to press a button here to get this to run. Oh, hang on, what am I doing? I've got my own bloody screen in front of me, pardon me. I installed this when I was worrying with sitting next to you, I was doing a little movie videotaping my screen. So this is the model with, actually I might as well let's run the actual proper model here. I think I've got the software running in the background here. Okay, so this is Minsky, my software package Minsky. And what I've got here is an extremely simple flowchart model. I'll see if I can make that a bit larger so I can talk to it more accurately. So let's just drag this over here a bit. It's exactly the same model, the same definitional model, but now shown as a system dynamics model. So I have the amount of capital stock determining output, which determines employment, which determines an employment rate, which gives you the rate of change of wages, which gives you the wage bill, which you subtract from output to give you profit. If investment desires, given the rate of profit, exceed the retained earnings, then you borrow money, you pay interest on that money, you then have depreciation reducing the existing capital stock, then have net capital being created, and back around you go. It's exactly the same model as taken from definitions, but shown in a system dynamics guise. And what I can do with Minsky, and I'll just see if I can drag that back again. So that's the model that's actually causing these results. The determinant variable there is how willing capitalists are to invest. So if I start with capitalists having a low desire to invest and simulate the model, and this is a beta version of the software, by the way, it takes a long time to react, which gets annoying when I'm trying to give a demo, but there's lots of error checking going in the background. What you get is a system that cycles to equilibrium. This is a classical complex systems model which has a bifurcation at a certain value at the desire to invest. And what you get is a nice convergence to equilibrium, which is, it's more dynamic than the neoclassicals think about, but it's what they think happens in capitalism. Well, if I now increase the desire to invest and run the same model again, it looks like you're converging. but then you don't. There's a period of more rapid convergence. That's the great moderation effect, leading to a breakdown. I explain the dynamics behind this, which is actually all to do with the distribution of income in my new book. But you'll see the wages share of GDP is declining in that model. If I show you the profit share, and let's see if I've got that shown elsewhere on the slide here. I've rather mucked up this demonstration here, I'm afraid to say. But if you take a look at, let's see if I make that larger. Let's expand. Okay. And make that larger again. Oh, great. Again, this is some of the software not working all that brilliantly. Oh, boy. Russell's going to love that one. Okay. Pardon me. I'll let that go in the background. I shouldn't be trying to demonstrate beta software. I'm running a software program. But what you have is the capitalist share fluctuates near the equilibrium, not around it, but near. The banker's share rises and the worker's share falls. The capitalists are the ones who are doing the borrowing the money, but the dynamics of the distribution of income means that the workers are the ones who cop it. And interestingly enough, a guy who got that right was one Karl Marx. I'll try to get back to where my slideshow is running here and explain that. So what you get is the rising debt ratio causes rising inequality. The profit share stabilises, it runs around the equilibrium until there's a breakdown. The banker's share rises, the social group that pays for it are workers who get a lower amount of money. And that's what happened in capitalism. In a stylised way, that's what we actually experienced from 1990 to 2010. So what's the logic behind it? It's simple once you look at the overall dynamics. Capitalism is a profit-driven system. So how much investment occurs depends upon the rate of profit. And profit is net of what you pay in wages and interest. Investment will, when it takes off, will lead to a rising level of debt to finance that investment. The boom will cause a rising amount of money going to bankers and workers as well when the unemployment rate drops sufficiently, which reduces the rate of profit. That falling rate of profit means that is a falling investment and therefore the economy goes into a slump. The slump will end when wages and debt payments fall sufficiently to restore the original profit share, but there will be a residue of debt left if there's that more aggressive desire to invest. Capitalists won't quite pay off all the debt they accumulated during the boom once the slump occurs because their returns are lower. Therefore, the next boom will start with a residue of debt and therefore a larger share of GDP going to bankers and a small share going to workers. And that process works through a number of cycles until you have the sort of breakdown that we saw in 2007. So that's a cyclical process. And interestingly enough, Marx, who gave the foundation model for this back in 1867, got it right mathematically. He said this this is in chapter 25 of volume 1 of Capital. He said, to put it mathematically, the rate of accumulation is the independent variable. The rate of wages is the dependent variable. Precisely correct. So rising debt causes rising inequality. And what you've got with rising debt is a rising rentier claim on capitalism. And so I'm a critic of the rentiers and not a critic of capitalism itself. But the system we have with debt-based money makes bankers the first claimants on income in the system, and the final residual claimants are the workers. So they're the ones who get screwed, even if they're not doing any of the borrowing at all. They're the ones who end up paying for the increased level of debt. And what we have now, over the last 30 years, is we've accumulated the highest level of private debt in the history of capitalism. These are two. The red line chart has been put together by the Bank of England after the crisis. The blue line of combining a number of series which I had to do a bit of rescaling, but the Bank of England data is pretty reliable all the way back to 1880. And you can see that the level of debt we have both in America and the UK right now is higher than it's ever been, including at the worst period during the Great Depression in 1930 in America, when deflation was the actual cause for that ratio rising. Now, what that's given